billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to On the Couch with me, Farida Rabia and Zoki and Zinzi. This is where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. Now, On the Couch, together with Lately in Land and Housing, is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, from evictions, equitable access to land, and tenure security. Today, we will cover inclusionary housing, what it is, why we need it, and how this housing tool is working in our country and in our city. In studio, we have Robin Park, Ross, researcher at Indifuna Kwasi, and Roland Postma, the managing director at Young Urbanist. So the focus this evening is inclusionary housing. Good evening. Welcome to On the Couch.
Evening, and thank you so much for having us.
So let's start with the scenarios to help us understand. So the Salmon family of 5 cannot afford social housing unit. They've been on the housing waiting list for 9 years, and their total household income is 19,000. Even though they fall into the social housing income band, all the social housing apartments are full. Everything on the open market is too expensive for them to still be able to afford school, food, and everything else that they need to live. The next option for a well-located affordable housing will be inclusionary housing. But because there is no formal policy in place in Cape Town, developers are very slow to build these homes. So please explain to us, what is inclusionary housing?
So just the basics of the mechanism is basically a tool that a municipality can use to almost incentivize the private sector to build affordable homes. So essentially, if I'm a developer and I want to build, I would go to the city to ask for permissions or rights to build. And the municipality can say, they can use that moment to say, yes, we're going to grant you your right to build, but in exchange, we're going to recoup some public good back. We're going to ask you to build some affordable homes. And this can either happen on site, so where the affordable homes get built within the existing private development, mixed into the other market-related homes. It can be off-site, so very close to the original development, but on another piece of land. Or the developer can pay a fees in lieu. This just means that the developer pays money into a fund to build affordable housing as opposed to building it within their development.
So how does that help someone who has been on the waiting list for 9 years to get a house?
So it's a great question. I think that what we really want to emphasize here is that inclusionary housing is only one of the tools that we need in a range of tools to attack this overwhelming housing and segregation crisis that we sit with. So what we hear in that example is, even if you qualify for social housing or another type of housing subsidy, even if you've been on the housing waiting list, unfortunately there aren't that many options available. There's just not enough affordable homes on the ground. So for example, in Cape Town, we have about 360,000 people on the housing waiting list, and across the whole city we only have about 4,500 social housing units. So you can see that the numbers really aren't adding up. What this means, not only that we need to kind of support and lift up the social housing model and make sure we get as many social housing homes as possible, but also that we need to use as many of these other tools as we can. That's where inclusionary housing comes into the story. It's an exciting tool because outside of the government's existing housing models and existing housing subsidies, it adds another tool to the basket that asks private developers to contribute a public good in the form of affordable homes. So it adds a supply of affordable homes into the range of options. And at the same time, it's also a really exciting tool because it really focuses on tackling segregation. So it's one of those tools because it focuses on where private developers are building. We know these are the best located areas, the center of town, Sea Point, Greenpoint, Woodstock, these areas where things are being built. It also means we can get affordable homes into these best located areas. So it's really exciting for both of those reasons.
I don't know if I feel hopeful, really, because you're saying it's one of the tools. Because, I mean, with all these ongoing conversations about housing, we get so many WhatsApp messages saying that, we've been waiting forever and forever. So this is just one tool. And I wonder how quickly this one tool would get people their homes, or a place to live. Even in that bracket of 19,000, maybe it sounds a lot, but if you think of school, clothing and food, then it's really not a lot. So one of the tools. What are the other tools that can help this process when we exclude government? If we are seeking to speak to developers and encouraging them to look into this.
So you're asking what are the tools in addition to inclusionary housing? So maybe just to say that there are some private developers in our context across the country that are already responding to the demand for affordable housing. So, for example, there's a company called Diversity that really aims to build homes as affordable as possible on the open market, while also investing in the urban environment, focusing on playgrounds, on making beautiful urban spaces. In our context, in Cape Town, just in Maitland, right close to the Salt River Circle, there's a private developer called Blue Bucks that's also focused on trying to make units that are as affordable as possible. This is all outside of the context of a policy. So I think it's exciting to see the uptake of private developers seeing that need and trying to respond to it. And also just to recognize that it also makes economic sense. There's a huge amount of demand in that area. What we've seen is that about 58% of Cape Townians earn up to 10,000 Rand, and 76%, so that's 3/4 of Cape Town, earn up to 22,000 Rand. So this is total household income a month, whoever you live within your home, if you add up your income. So we can see, 3/4 of Cape Town is earning 22,000 Rand a month and below. There's this huge amount of demand, but in our formal housing space, only 34% of homes are catering to that. So imagine 3/4 of the population trying to squeeze into a third of the formal housing supply. So basically just to say that is hopeful in that there is a lot of demand in the affordable housing space. So hopefully we'll see more private developers taking that up. But at the same time, inclusionary housing is an exciting tool. I see you looking skeptical, but it is an exciting tool for the reason that whoever the developer is, it kind of requires, if you're building in these areas and you're building certain types of developers, then you must contribute. It almost normalizes in our society, first of all, that people have to contribute, that these private developers have to contribute to public good. But practically, it also just means that we will be seeing affordable homes in those areas. And on your question about speed, I think what you raise is a very real kind of skepticism about, there's all this demand and what's really happening. But just to say that, that's the whole idea with introducing another tool, is to say we can let the government housing models tick along and we need to support them. We need them to be resourced. We need them to function better. But at the same time, we can add another tool using the kind of agility and urgency that the private sector builds. So in general, the private sector is able to build much faster than the government has ever been able to do. So there is a lot of potential in that space, in that we hope to see, once we have an inclusionary housing policy in place in Cape Town, like we have in other places, then we hope to see, as developers are responding to this demand, as they're building their developments, we can just be gathering up and recouping these affordable homes. And just to say that up until now, to date, there have been about 16 private developments in well-located parts of Cape Town that have either committed to an inclusionary housing contribution or have serious considerations for inclusionary housing. And that's so exciting because the policy isn't even in place. So they're proving that inclusionary housing is already here. They're proving that it's already possible. And between those developments, even outside of policy, it's added up to about 600 units already. So there really is potential in this tool.
I can't add to that other than to say that I agree with Robin. We need all the tools. I think it's legitimate. I mean, 28, I mean, how many years post-apartheid, we still have the same spatial apartheid planning, violence, lack of opportunities, and people have to ask these legitimate questions. But we have to work, and this is an exciting opportunity for Cape Town as a city. We saw Stellenbosch finally introducing that after the Western Cape. This is from national government taking tone. And of course, someone who's been from Pretoria, but I've lived across the world, this is normal, and it's something we need to embrace, and we have an opportunity here, but we should not let forego on the exact mandate to keep accountable when it comes to social and public housing from national and the city and province. It doesn't change that, but this is another exciting opportunity.
And just to say, private developers are going to build either way, right? So either they're going to build what they're already building, something that the majority of people can't afford lots of the times, especially in these most well-located areas, or they're going to build and we secure something that's affordable in the development of the city that's already happening. And that really seems like a no-brainer.
So with these, if we imagine that developers are creating these houses for people and it's affordable, what is affordability?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And obviously the devil's in the detail with policies like this. So because the policy doesn't exist yet, we don't have those types of guidelines. We have used the City of Cape Town's kind of affordable housing bracket is for people with household incomes of between 3,500 Rand and 18,000 Rand a month. That's kind of been bumped up to 22,000 now, but essentially it's a bracket that says, okay, you earn too much to qualify for a free house, like a RDP B&G house, but you earn too little to actually be able to afford anything that's out there on the private market in a good area. So it's kind of that gap of people that's not being served by the free homes, but also not being served by the market. The thing about that is that obviously that's a really big range of people, right? A household earning 3,500 Rand a month or a household earning 18,000 Rand a month. And as you said, costs add up really quickly. We know we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. In South Africa, we have a huge amount of debt burden. So actually, if somebody earns 18,000 Rand a month, that might not be reflective of what they have to spend after debt, after school fees, after all of these things. What we have to push for, and that's the opportunity we have now while the city is developing a policy, is for these homes to be as affordable as possible. One of the ways that we can do that is by using a tool that social housing uses called income bands. So you would take that big category of people between 3,500 and 18,000, and you would kind of slice it up. And you would say, okay, we don't want these affordable homes to only cater to people earning right at the top, only earning 18,000. That's especially important because this tool is something that private developers are going to be building, and we know they're profit driven. We have to make sure that we get the rules in place that they have to actually cater to people all across that income spectrum. So whether you're earning 18,000, whether you're earning 5,000, you should be catered for. In the existing examples that we've seen in Cape Town, these 16 private developments that I mentioned, the most affordable example that we've seen is a development in Pardon Island with units going for about 3,000 Rand a month. So this would be catering to families earning about, small families earning about 9,000 Rand a month. Another example would be in the landmark Harbour Arch development right at the entrance to town. This is an AMDEC development, which is one of the biggest property developers in South Africa. So really exciting to see this developer taking on board the idea of inclusionary housing. But in this development, they've committed 10% of their units, so about 100 units, 100 apartments in this big block right as you come into town, for half of the cost that they otherwise would have gone for. So on the market they would go for 12,000 Rand rent a month, and the inclusionary units will be 6,000 Rand rent per month. So even though these aren't perfect, we have to just continue to fight for these units to be as affordable as possible.
So ultimately, if I think about it, even if you are on the waiting list and you do say you qualify to be a part of this inclusionary housing, you are actually renting, would there be an opportunity to maybe buy the unit, buy the apartment for that person, or would it just be, because I would find it strange that a citizen would not be able to own their house or own a home. And I think that's the ultimate goal of people when they think about housing. They want to own where they live and leave it behind for their kids as such, especially if you've been waiting for such a long time. So imagine you've been waiting for like 10 years, 20 years, even more than that, and then you finally get your house, and then you're probably too old to actually fully enjoy that. So then you hope that your children would enjoy that and, create a legacy. So is there legacy building with inclusionary housing? I just asked out of curiosity.
I mean, that's an exciting conversation. Is what is the South African dream, right? Legacy, intergenerational wealth. I mean, those are key legitimate points, especially with our history, with our democracy, what has taken place, roots in the last 30 years. These are key questions. I guess for us as young people, especially someone who represents a lot of young people in the built form sector, so that are very passionate about our cities, our towns, we really have to ask, what is the dream? And then how do we view success fundamentally? And I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to own something and wanting to pass that on. And to answer the question, inclusionary zoning covers both renting and ownership. Okay. But renting, again, back to your previous question around affordability, that's something that's far more affordable. I'm going to let Robin perhaps just, I'm quoting myself here, but just to make one point, I think we do have to challenge the idea of what is the South African dream and success, and there's nothing wrong with renting. And perhaps another conversation is to talk about normalizing rents, but also having rent control so that you have right to tenure. Just because you're renting doesn't mean you're not vulnerable, because I think in the current market where the majority are renters, they are vulnerable, where because constitutionally right to housing is something ingrained, but what does it mean? Renting is actually not a bad thing. It still means you have all those things and the right to pass on to someone else rather than being evicted. But that's another conversation, but I'm going to stop there. But I completely agree with you, but I might if you don't mind, challenge that idea that intergenerational wealth isn't just home ownership, but also it can be renting, but we need to also change our legislation, which again, it's another conversation, but I'll stop there.
Maybe just to build on what Roland is saying, it's an interesting thing for us to think about. As you say, it really is reflective of a desire of many people. But just as Roland is challenging us to think differently, I think it is important for us to think about our current context. I mean, anyone who's currently paying a mortgage will be suffering very heavily under these interest rate hikes that we've been experiencing. And so to really think carefully about, what is a more affordable, long-term sustainable option for people. Sometimes the pressure or the cultural norm of owning a home gets people into situations that isn't actually affordable for them. So our priority is really what will work best for people in the long term, whether that's rental or ownership. And as Roland said, with inclusionary housing, we advocate for both options. And, this is a tool that's 50 years old. It's used all around the world. It comes out of the civil rights movement in the US, so it does come from a global north context, but it really has moved all around the world. We've been learning from how it's been implemented in India with a more kind of similar inequality context to ours. And in all of these different places, we see it implemented with flexibility. So you can rent or you can own. It depends. So for example, the Harbour Arch example that we listed, that's a rental one, but in other instances, developers have been interested to figure out, okay, how do we sell these units at an affordable rate? And we really hope to see both options in the policy. I think something we have to hold on to is that in all regards, we have to have flexibility so that people have choice, right? Some people might choose renting, some people might choose ownership, and we need a policy that accommodates all the different needs of people.
And so speaking about policy, and I do like what you brought up about what is the South African dream, right? Intergenerational wealth, what would that look like in this modern context? And with this housing crisis, how we can shift our focus? Because yes, it's one thing to say, yes, we've been waiting and, we continue to wait and the waiting list doesn't exist and I'm getting all these sorts of information and I feel hopeless. But if there's an option to live somewhere where you have access to schools, clinics, and the mall, whatever, that's easy for you, then that, seems to be a short-term option, I suppose. It's one that one could look into. But I would wonder how this conversation would be like on the ground with people who've been waiting for so long. So how do you have that conversation? Let's just imagine again 30 years of waiting, 9 years of waiting, and all that income bracket. And yes, I qualify, I don't. So it's a bit tough.
I don't know how to have this conversation because I can't, as someone from my background, as a white South African, I can't relate. Saying that conversation, so I can't give you an answer because I don't know the experience, the pain, the suffering, the mislies, the corruption, politicking. I can't reply to that. But I just have to hope and dream and see what we can do to respond and what we can. And yes, it also to challenge, as someone who was born in 1995, is to challenge the South African dream. But at the same time, to answer that question, I can't personally, my organization can't. We represent a lot of diverse voices across the country. But to say that we need to push the boundary and dream of what we have to do as a country to address our problems, especially around housing. And it's interlinked with mobility because most people spend 5-6 hours commuting, more than 40% of their income on transportation. So we need well-located housing, but also perhaps we need to move businesses to the periphery where a lot of our densest areas are. So, and then I guess that also links us to what we call additional housing backyarding as well. But again, I can't answer that question. I don't think anyone can because, we've had 30 years and what we can show a lot, of course, in our advancements, but material wealth, intergenerational wealth, that's a different conversation. And I don't think this inclusionary housing answers it, but it starts to move in that direction of reconciliation, of healing, but it's not the full solution, as Robin was saying.
Maybe just some small insights from our engagements through movement partners, activists that we work with. There's a lot of people. First, I think it's important to recognize that in our context, there is no silver bullet. There's no one solution here, as we've been speaking about, one in a range of tools needed, right? So we're already sitting with a complicated context where, we are almost 3 decades after apartheid. The government's main drive for providing the right to housing has been these free homes that actually in many ways has just entrenched spatial apartheid, keeping people of color on the periphery, this unintended consequence. So we really sit at a complicated and difficult time where all of our housing models, all the options that exist, so that example, you do get ownership, but there's extreme downsides, for example, location, in some instances the quality, but some people might still choose or prefer that because ownership is important to them. With our social housing model, it's crucially important because it can get into better located areas than others, and I know we're going to have an episode later on in the series diving deep into social housing, but at the same time, people also struggle if you have irregular income or you're an entrepreneur. It's very difficult to access social housing. So each of these models really have their challenges, but each of them have their place. Each of them have a target. They do something specific, and that's why we need all of them together. With inclusionary housing, as you say, when we speak to people on the ground, some people don't feel like this is affordable enough for them. And again, here with inclusionary housing, you're balancing the feasibility of a private development with the affordability of a resident. So it's a difficult kind of seesaw balance, but the point is to say what it does do and why we do need it is that it does allow us to generate affordable homes through the private sector, and it does allow us to tackle segregation. So this is a really crucial and important point, in that, even when we get social housing, other types of government models into the best located areas, we would never, with any other tool, see affordable units mixed within market-related units. So imagine a building where inside the building you have a real mix and diversity of incomes, like a real class and race integrated building. This is something in South Africa that we really have not done well to do and prioritize. And I think, even in some instances, we see a lot of resistance to desegregation in certain areas. And I think that just shows up more the importance and the need of tools like inclusionary housing. The fact that people resist living next to people of different races or classes than them just proves us that we have to work harder and faster to make it happen and to normalize it. We live in such a skewed and strange society, especially in a city like Cape Town, where this racial apartheid that we sit with is so normalized, and it has to be disrupted. So even with all of its challenges, as inclusionary housing has, and we have to be honest about those limitations, right? This is not a tool that will ever provide the highest number of units. This is not a tool that will ever get the deepest down affordability. This isn't for people that, earn 100 Rand a month. Even with those limitations, it's a critical tool for what it can do, and for what's missing in our current housing models.
07861011112 is the number that you can send your messages on. We are speaking about inclusionary housing and why you need it and how it can benefit us. When I hear you speak, I agree, because in the new South Africa, that was the dream, right? That we are all included, that we all have access to everything, that we're not limited to things because of the color of our skin and all of that. You speak about resistance, and I question that because I was given the numbers of one area that is saying like, okay, we'll have these houses, but only the people in this area can live there. And it's all of these little things. So yes, I see it and it makes sense and it's exciting. But I think that, well, just my thoughts, that the resistance will be a lot stronger because maybe you've been in a place and you've never imagined that you would be in Woodstock, for example, or maybe you just drive through town. You're so used to coming from side C to going to Greenpoint. It's so far-fetched. So that's why I asked about the real conversations happening on the ground, because it's like I'd rather wait for the house that the government is going to give me than, for something that...
And on that, just to clarify, actually, the resistance that we see is mainly from existing residents. So, for example, there was a development in Sea Point by the Berman brothers where the neighbors kind of mobilized to object to this building. Lots of different reasons. They said it was too tall, it was going to obscure their views. But in amongst those objections, we also saw people being like, oh, it's going to make our area like Hillbrow. We don't want low-income people. You see that kind of overt classism, racism coming through. And actually, even though on the side of people that might live in inclusionary housing, the main concerns are make it more affordable so that I can live there. Actually, we've seen a huge appetite for people to take up inclusionary housing, and people actually wanted to make sure that it works for them so that they have that option. And I think that really speaks to the benefits that you were speaking about earlier of specific location. So people will choose that. They want to know that they can afford it, but people will choose that because of the access it gives them to schools, to job opportunities, to amenities, to services. And I think we can't underestimate the value of that in terms of inclusionary housing. Where people live matters.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. So you spoke about Stellenbosch and them releasing this draft at least. What does this draft entail? Does it look similar to what we talk about when we speak about housing?
So it's really exciting. This is idea that's been on the policy agenda in our country since the mid-2000s. So this is not a new idea. In 2019, Joburg became the first municipality with a formal policy. And then recently, the Western Cape government implemented this overarching policy, as Roland referenced earlier. And then we see Stellenbosch with their draft policy, which was out very, very recently. Basically, it's a policy that asks or requires private developers to provide a percentage of affordable homes, kind of between 10 and 30% affordable homes, depending on the context, in exchange for their planning approvals. So what's really exciting is that we see the municipality using kind of incentives. They're like, well, what can we give the private developers so we can get more, even up to 30% affordable homes in a private development, which is really exciting thinking to see. So Stellenbosch has really been, they've forged ahead and they've really led on this front. Meanwhile, the city of Cape Town has been developing a policy for many years, dragging its feet. But again, there's always things to improve on. And with the Stellenbosch policy, something to be concerned about is the issue of affordability. So in some places in the policy, they mention that they'll be looking at households earning up to 22,000 Rand a month. In other places in the policy, they mention households earning up to 27,000, I think 600 a month. So we have to continuously fight to maximize the amount of affordable units we can get from private developers, as well as the most affordable homes that we can get. But overall, it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I would add that they intentionally look at placements so well located again, because we're talking about mobility. We have a transportation crisis. I don't want to sit in traffic 4 hours. I want to spend half of my income on transportation. So I think well location. So, which is amazing. I mean, Stellenbosch is, it's an exciting opportunity, and I think led by the Western Cape, of course, national, it's an opportunity. But, I just want to kind of add that, apartheid segregated, and I think the term we want to perhaps introduce here, Robin, is NIMBYism. So it stands for not in my neighborhood. And I think we have NIMBYism across many areas, not just former white areas, actually across the board. So I think I definitely recognize that. So again, as a young South African, I would push what the South African dream is, and when it comes to community, but also densifying. Because big part of inclusionary housing zoning is the assumption that we densify around transportation corridors. So we need the right zoning. But what we saw is this opposition for densification. So again, there's a lot of work that needs to do, but as Robin is saying, this is part of it, and of course, I think from their side especially to lobby the affordability side as well, and that's again that applies to Stellenbosch. Despite it being a very good policy, there's still stuff that can be improved to address households earning from 3,500 to up to 22,000. So that's the opportunity, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, we have about 4 minutes. And this listener sent a very long message saying, "Dear radio hosts and guests, extremely thought-provoking. I wonder how Finland has managed to invest in affordable housing. Not one person in Finland lives on the street as their government look after its people. I was amazed to see how inclusive their social housing policy has worked. At the present moment, after 27 years, we have lost it due to racism and white supremacy in our country of South Africa. It's all about us and them. Thank you. Without prejudice, my comments. The land belongs to all who lives in it. Please ask the people the type of homes they prefer. I think that's also something to consider.
Livability.
Yes, something really we should consider. 2 minutes. Oh my gosh, Ahmed is saying I have 2 minutes, but if we could conclude in roughly 2 minutes.
I guess from our side, to conclude is just to say that, we have to be realistic about what this tool can and can't do. But what it can do is generate affordable homes through the private sector, and it can also tackle segregation in the stickiest areas that have been most resistant and most segregated. And what's really exciting for us is to see, it's almost like the momentum for this tool to be used. So the Western Cape, Stellenbosch, Cape Town's developing a policy, but even Roland's organization, Young Urbanists, in this latest policy, we saw different young built environment professionals, getting involved, seeing an appetite for this tool to be used. So I think we have to really be excited about the momentum that we have to get this tool going.
Agree. So, I mean, just to add to that point that Robin was saying is that we really want to reshape this idea of what it means to live in a city. South Africa's two things: we're urban and we're young. So this is our country. We have a big say. So to all those young people, please, I know where apathy is high. I completely understand, but participate. Talk to your local ward councillor. Participate in submissions and have a say. It matters. Your voice matters, and this is part of the tool. And together we can create a new country through our cities and towns.
Together we can create a new country in our cities and towns. That was Robin Park-Ross, researcher at Kwasi, and Roland Postma, the managing director at Young Urbanist, speaking to us about inclusionary housing and how it can be of benefit for us. But that's all we have for you. Up next is House and Home on Reflections with Ayub Ali. But for myself and the team, it's a warm assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.